Show Greg Bruorton. He has a book that is so fascinating. It's called Baby Jane. And I told this to one of my friends the other day. You have to pick this book up because I'm very serious about this. I took it with me on a trip and I was reading it on the plane and I wasn't finished. So when I went to go to get my bags at baggage claim, the bags were going around. It seemed like it was taking time. So I sat down on the bench and I started to finish it. And I missed my bag going around and they pulled it off. This was an American flight. And so that's the greatest compliment I can give. If I was so pulled into this that I wanted to finish it, that I lost track of what I was doing, that tells you something, that's for sure. So it is quite a pleasure to welcome to the show Greg Bruorton here on Author's Corner. Greg, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
This is indeed my pleasure. Never heard a testimonial about a book better than you.
Well, thank you for that.
And
so tell us about the book. Tell us why you wrote the book.
All right, you can see the book right here, Baby Jane, and you see a paratrooper. I'd ask why a paratrooper on the front of a cover book, and there's an abandoned baby in the story. Just so happens that one paratrooper, when he hit the ground, he was dragged across the whole drop zone because he couldn't unwrap himself from the canopy lines around his neck. He couldn't reach the turnbuckle. And so he said, well, I'll just surf the drop zone. And that's what he did, along with his adopted brother. When Sergeant Donnelly, who's the main character in the book, unloaded the parachute from him, and he went into the woods because he kept hearing a sound. He couldn't understand what it was. Finally, and this is in the story, and I'm not going to tell too much, but he goes in and he hears a whimper, soft whimper. And he keeps looking around in the brush and the vegetation. And then he discovers an abandoned baby. And the story goes on.
So for you in writing...
And it's a great story, I think.
It is a great story, and that's part of it. You set us up well. So for you, tell everybody about your background, because you obviously know a lot about paratroopers. Tell everybody what you did. Tell them your background.
Yeah. Well, first, today happens to be Paratrooper Day, the 16th of August.
Wow.
That's why I'm wearing this, in honor of Paratrooper Day. And it goes back to the early 70s when I went to jump school at the age of 34. And I can run just as much as I did with the younger paratroopers. But I graduated from jump school on June the 1st of 1973. And I was a paratrooper ever since then until I retired in 1980. That was a joy to me. Now the adrenaline rush, oh yeah, we had it. And the camaraderie is even more important because when one paratrooper sees another, it's brother all the way. Now, I was in the Army for 20 years. I was for Sigma Corps, communications, and then later in military intelligence, about 6 years before I retired. I served as a special security officer for the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne from 1976 to 1979. That was the apex of my career. And the apex also is my time in the 82nd Airborne. It's esteemed, let me tell you, it is heard around the world. I'm not going to get into another story about it, but I enjoyed writing this book because of my military experiences. Now, I did not live the life of courting a young second lieutenant because I was already married. But the story goes where Sergeant Donnelly, he's a half Apache, by the way, and he jumped with his best friend and adopted brother and this Lieutenant Debra Simmons, and they all three took the baby to the Army hospital there at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and they had her treated. She was almost, lungs were infected and all that. And the story goes on. His desire, Craig Donnelly, is to adopt this baby because they linked together the moment he held her up in his arms. Now, she didn't trickle down his back, but they bonded as no other father and daughter could. And he wanted to adopt this baby. But there were hurdles in front of him. He had to find Miss Special. Miss Special happened to be a second lieutenant in the Army in 18th Airborne Corps, the place where I retired from. And of course, there's forbidden for officers and non-coms to associate with one another, off duty. They had to get around that. And then they had to get around the adoption process for the baby. And that was their two primary missions. Now, leading up to this Lieutenant Simmons and Sergeant Donnelly, that is a story in itself, and I encourage you to take your time as you read it, because not only is it going to bring happy feelings to you, and sometimes bad feelings in some chapters, but it's going to come out rich and rosy.
In other words, it's a happy ending, we'll tell people, but you can't figure it out. There is a great love story in this. And what's so interesting to me is because of your background, it's just, you can tell, you certainly know the business of being a paratrooper, and that you can really feel throughout the book too.
That's what brought it on. That's what started the entire book. That one jump I had, and I was dragged across a huge drop zone, and I couldn't get untangled from the canopy nylons that hung around my neck, and it stopped me at the turnbuckles at each shoulder. I couldn't release them. So I just, here I go, surfer paratrooper. So
wow.
It was a good score. I got up and I walked off the drop.
Wow, thank goodness. How many jumps did you make in your career? How many jumps do you think you did?
I fractured my back on my last one, which was the 44th jump. The medical doctor, after I got up, I walked off that drop zone that day too. I dug a hole where I had landed though. And I got up and I knew something was seriously wrong. So I got up, went back to the rendezvous point, turned in my parachute, my reserve parachute, and then loaded the truck up, on the 2.5 ton truck, take us back to Fort Bragg. I knew something was wrong. My back was terribly hurting, so I stopped off at the dispensary on the way in, and the warrant officer took x-rays, and he told me, if you jump one more time, you might end up in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. So I didn't want to take that chance. I stayed around for 2 more months, and I retired in March of 1980, a little over 20 years. But my life in my career was one of the best I've ever had, besides my music career. And I live the airborne motto today. I can't help it because it's ingrained in me. But
right, and that's why I say
the Army, and if I could, I'd go back and get my.
Yeah, that's why I say you can feel that in the book. I think we'd be remiss not.
If I could,
yeah, I think we'd be remiss not to talk about your music background, because that's part of who you are, and of course the book Baby Jane is what we've been talking about. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, but we are people, and your background is so fascinating. Tell us about the musical side of you.
Oh, you read it. Well, I've always been around music. My 3 sisters were on the radio singing country music and pop songs back when I was younger, 14 or 15 years of age. That was in Detroit. At the age of 16, I started playing the first guitar that was left behind the house by a fellow that used to come and play. He went down to South Carolina to get married, never saw him again. So I decided, well, I've got a guitar here. And I took it over and I learned about 11 chords on it. That was shown to me by a friend of the family. And there I went, August of 1956, this month, making it 68 years.
Wow.
To the day.
Wow.
And I had a good career in playing music. I did it professionally. I taught guitar. I played in bands. I formed my own band so that I didn't have to wait for everybody else to show up. And I had all the equipment, amplifier, electric guitar. I played a bright orange Gretsch electric guitar, and it was amazing. I still have it. And I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed teaching guitar as well, because it just brings me back to able to help somebody else go over the hurdles that I had. So I have not stopped playing music yet. I'm still plunking away.
Yeah, and you had some fun plunking away. That's for sure. I love that story. So I was thinking, boy, that could be another direction for you. Are you going to continue to write? Do you see yourself writing some other books?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. I've got stories written about a guitar player and a guitar player student, and who wanted to grow up and join the Army and become a paratrooper, but he didn't. But I was hoping he would. But yeah, I've written several stories about guitar players and guitar playing and all of that. I've written romance stories between blacks and whites, the racial division. They're short, mostly novelettes. I've written about Harley riders, which I had been a Harley rider for over 40 years. And I finally sold the thing and used the money to buy my carport here. My wife was ecstatic when I sold it. I still mourn for it.
Of course.
But I'm an old Harley rider, and you...
Yeah, of course. When people read Baby Jane, what do you hope they take away from reading it?
They're going to take away that not only a glimpse at military life background in the paratrooper sense, but also life in general, that soldiers are humans too. They have the feelings, they have love, they have bad happenings in their lives, and they have happy endings in their lives. They're just like the rest of us. I was just that way too. I was just a civilian in military uniform, but with a head thought of doing military things. I think that the reader's going to go away with a better glimpse of how military life can be. And at Fort Bragg, it's all about jumping. Mainly. Well, they call it Fort Liberty now because the political correctness crowd got to them. That's my opinion. But jumping is the mainstay of Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Yeah. We certainly have seen that over the years, and that's your connection, obviously. Well, Baby Jane, I gave the great testimonial, and I really meant it in the beginning. Get the book; it will entertain you. You will laugh, and you will really enjoy this book. Greg Bruorton, thank you so much.
Thank you, Miss Kate. I enjoy looking at you every time you come on board, and I appreciate the time that you've taken with me. This is a step up for me. And with that glorious smile of yours, no wonder you've written 5 successful books. Thank you, Miss Kate. I appreciate you in every way.
Thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate you.